Selene Gallio is a centuries-old mutant psychic vampire and a major antagonist in Marvel Comics. Also known as the Black Queen, she is a longtime member of the Hellfire Club and as such has often tormented the X-Men and their allies. She also fought Captain America and the Daughters of Liberty. She's immortal, she possesses great magical powers, she can just manipulate shadows and darkness, she can drain the life force from any living being that comes into contact with her skin, she's pretty cool. After a failed attempt to sacrifice the population of ancient Rome to make herself a god, she founded Nova Roma, an isolated colony modeled after ancient Rome that survived into modern times in Brazil's Amazon rainforest. She maintains her immortality with her mutant power because she likes to absorb the essence or life force of others. She can also absorb memories and take control of people this way. So by drawing on the power she's absorbed, she can grant herself superhuman abilities, enhanced strength, speed, whatever she needs. Oh, did I mention she's a telepath with very, very good telekinetic abilities? Combine all of this, and you've also got her lovely extended lifespan. She's become one of the most skilled magic users in the world, and I think at one point she was even considered a potential candidate to replace Doctor Strange as Sorcerer Supreme. So that's how you get a great antagonist in the New Mutant series, and also the whole Necrosha story arc. Soft Serve's sole mutant ability is to defecate ice cream, controlling the flavor she creates and how much she serves, making her a mutant with pretty much zero inherent fighting capabilities. She was first introduced in a background moment in Way of X issue number 2, and artist Bob Quinn later elaborated on her powers with a detailed sketch on Twitter. So originally he's yeah, she's got different plumbing from baseline humans, but later amended that her body is a portal to the ice cream dimension, and the phrase defecating is more about the unfortunate placement of the portal's exit than her actual biological process. Soft Serve, by the way, is not the only mutant with ice cream related powers. You've also got to consider Ice Cream, who can turn himself into any flavor of ice cream. Yeah, ice cream. Alright. According to Bob Quinn, there's no relation between the two, but Soft Serve is a big fan of ice cream. Just don't confuse the two, everybody, because it's easy to do. Sketch has the mutant ability to reshape reality by altering it upon her sketch pad. She can only affect non-organic matter with this power, fashioning metallic tendrils, metallic sheaths, and obviously she needs to be able to see an object in order to affect it. Thankfully for us, she carries around bags full of sketch pads and pencils at all times. In terms of what history we know about her, I think she was held prisoner in Russia by mutant traders until being saved by the X-Men. Oh, and before his abrupt departure from writing Uncanny X-Men, Chris Claremont did intend for Sketch to join the X-Men, but now I got nothing for her. Having the physical attributes of a fish, Sammy Perret, or Squid Boy, was the perfect target for bullies. Now intent on stopping the harassment, Sammy plotted to kill his tormentors, but thankfully a meeting with Professor X saved Sammy from the potentially deadly showdown, and he was yeah, I'll enroll at the Xavier Institute instead. Well, en route to the Institute with Professor Xavier, he was hey, I can't contact anybody. So they took a detour over to Ireland to help with a mission, and upon investigating, we found ourselves assisting Juggernaut. And then Juggernaut and Sammy became good friends after Sammy saved Juggernaut's life. Kane became a surrogate father to Sammy, but then when Sammy's mother found out about his relationship with Kane, she called Alpha Flight to bring Sammy back home to her. And there, Sammy was going through some harm. Really not great. But then Juggernaut was hey, I'm gonna come visit. And well, Juggernaut took care of the attacker and was subsequently arrested by Alpha Flight, the big superheroes in Canada. Oh, did I mention Sammy's from Vancouver? After that, Sammy's mother left the bad guy, Sammy returned to the Institute, and good time. Later on, Juggernaut infiltrated Brotherhood of Evil, working as a double agent, but Sammy stumbled upon that group meeting and he's oh my gosh, Juggernaut's betraying the X-Men. So he lashed out at him, causing the group's leader, Black Tom Cassidy, to sadly kill the young mutant, pulping him. Eventually, Sammy became a candidate for resurrection by the Five, and when Kane heard that Sammy's resurrection was coming on the queue, he made it a point to be there to welcome him, and to apologize for how things kinda went previously. Jazz, the guy with the power to have blue skin. Not even the power to turn off the blue, just blue skin. Real name John Xander. His dream was to be a rapper, but he wasn't really good. And while in Mutant Town, he was a runner for one of the crime lords of the area, selling toad juice, a substance made from the secretions of Toad Boy. And after M-Day, he was one of the few mutants to retain his mutant powers and appearance, but then was forcibly relocated to the mutant camp, where he was killed by fellow mutant and tent mate Johnny D, thanks to a miniature voodoo doll that Johnny made from a DNA sample. So remember Spat and Grovel, the acquaintances of Gambits who appeared in a couple of issues of Uncanny around the trial times? They had the action figures that were part of the Marvel's Most Wanted. Well, if you remember them, good on you. Do you remember that third person with them? The one that we only had for a couple of panels? His name was Landscape. He was a mutant bounty hunter with the power to create holographic environments, and that's all we really know about him. Equus, also known as Danny, was a metamorph who was able to transform his body into an equine state with horse-like speed that resembled a winged centaur. So while in the state he had flight, he had horse-like speed, really great. History on Danny: his father worked as a government scientist before he had an accident in the lab, and then retired to raise horses in Texas. So Danny was born a mutant, grew up tending to horses, and then he felt that kinship. So when he was in his mutant form, he would run with the horses. He would take the horses to be shown at state fairs, one such being the Texas State Fair, and that's where he was detected by both Magneto and Professor Xavier's mutant locating hardware. So Magneto got there first and was like, "I dub you Equus, the latest soldier in my crusade." And upon the arrival of the X-Men, Magneto was like, "Hey Danny, they're the bad guys, they're here to kidnap you." So he took on his mutant form and fought alongside Magneto against them. Now when Magneto carelessly injured Danny's horses, Danny turned against him and with the aid of the X-Men, defeated him. Danny elected to stay in Texas after this, but the X-Men did leave him a little card for the Xavier Institute, so the door's not completely closed. As part of Gene Nation, a group of Morlock whom Storm encountered and relocated to Africa, Boost was a mutant who kind of functioned like a living battery cell. He could augment other mutants' powers by a process called body jumping, where he would merge with them and boost their powers. So when humanity's last stand attacked the former Gene Nationals at their new home, Storm, the X-Men, the Brotherhood all arrived to offer the mutants protection against their enemies. Humanity's last stand was eventually defeated, and Boost, along with somebody else, they were like, "Yeah, let's get out of here." They helped the Brotherhood escape in return for being, well, dropped off at an unrevealed place of their choosing. Sadly, Boost was affected by M-Day, lost his mutant powers, but was somehow repowered and then became a citizen of Krakoa, and was suggested as a potential replacement for Cortez in Sword, but other than that, don't have a lot. Mother Inferior was a member of the Morlocks, the outcasts, the community of mutants who lived in the tunnels beneath New York City, and her power, kinda handy in this situation, she had the ability to communicate with and control rats and other vermin types of creatures. Handy when you live in the tunnels underneath a rat-infested city, scary if you're me. Well, most folks had been killed in the mutant mass extinction event. A couple of folks escaped, a few with the help of X-Men and whatnot, and Mother Inferior and her family. Part of that, they came across Anna in the old Poseidon. They helped take care of Pester's offspring until one day, Spider-Man's like, "Hey, I'm here to investigate some stuff." And Spider-Man thought the Morlocks were threatening Anna's descendant, and he was like, "Oh, I'm gonna rescue this little thing." But then he found out that it belonged to the Morlocks, and naturally Mother Inferior fought him. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong folks, I think she's now dead because Firebrand had that whole building collapse thing. TBD. So you might think you're familiar with Thumbelina, but we're not here to talk about the Dawn Bluth adaptation today. This mutant first made her appearance with the now defunct team known as the Mutant Liberation Front, the MLF. And although very loyal to her teammates and part of the team since the get-go, she was often just a source of humor to them. I don't think she took part in a lot of active missions unless she was really needed, because sadly her size and slow movement was usually more of a hindrance than helpful. Like, don't get me wrong, when it came to espionage missions, she was really great. Her ability to shrink down to like a quarter of an inch allowed her to get into places and access things that most of us can't. So she was able to save the team, she was good in a crunch. She would later help out the X-Force in a battle along with a short-lived revamp of the MLF, and she teamed up to help destroy some menaces, but then after that she would just like poof off and we didn't really know where she—
Number 10. Devil Dinosaur. Let's start from far left field. Devil Dinosaur is, well, a dinosaur hailing from the alternate reality of Earth 78411, aka Dinosaur World, a universe that exists in the primordial past. Now in his youth, Devil Dinosaur faced a close call with the end of his life, nearly consumed by a tribe of ruthless beings known as the Killer Folk, who inhabited this world. However, he was saved by Moon Boy, a young member of a rival tribe to the Killer Folk known as the Small Folk. Now when Devil Dinosaur was exposed to the relentless flames of the Killer Folk's fiery assault, the fiery baptism triggered a mutation within the dinosaur, granting him extraordinary powers beyond those of his kind. Specifically, it gave him the intelligence of an average human. Now simultaneously, it also altered his once olive green skin to a striking and vibrant shade of flame red. Other than his intelligence and his red skin, Devil Dinosaur also exhibited unwavering loyalty to his companion, Moon Boy, who he shared a ton of adventures with, even eventually coming over to the main 616 Marvel Universe. Number 9. Madame Web. I actually completely forgot that this was the case, but Cassandra Webb, who would eventually become Madame Web, was born a mutant with tremendous telepathic and precognitive powers. Those are some solid powers to have, but she was also born paralyzed and blind, which does complicate things quite a bit. Over time, things got even worse for her physically as she developed myasthenia gravis, a chronic autoimmune disorder in which antibodies destroy the communication between nerves and muscles, resulting in weakness of the skeletal muscles. So, in order to try and help her, her husband built her a life support system that she had to remain attached to. And could you imagine someone loving you so much that they build a life support system for you? I can't. She eventually became involved with Spider-Man, using her powers to fill him in on crimes that she could not physically deal with herself. She also revealed that she knew his secret identity due to her telepathy, making her one of the first people to ever learn Spider-Man's identity. Number 8. Abigail Brand. Abigail Brand burst onto the scene in the astonishing X-Men, where she assumed the leadership of SWORD, or the Sentient World Observation and Response Department, a specialized branch of S.H.I.E.L.D. dedicated to safeguarding Earth from extraterrestrial threats. Now, at first, her relationship with the X-Men was far from amicable, and she had no intentions of collaborating with them. However, her perspective underwent a significant transformation as she grew closer to the X-Men, and particularly sparking a romantic connection between the two. From the get-go, we knew that Abigail Brand was a unique blend of human and alien heritage, but it wasn't until several years into her character's evolution, during the Avengers vs. X-Men epilogue miniseries AVX Consequences, that we all learned of her latent mutant powers. She inherited pyrokinetic abilities from her mutant mother, shedding light on her own dormant mutant potential. But despite her newfound capabilities, Abigail often refrains from wielding her mutant powers when possible, instead relying on her remarkable prowess as an agent. It's also a little hard to call her a hero, but here we are. Number 7. Whizzer. Some of you may be extremely familiar with Whizzer. He's the speedster superhero from Marvel Comics that somehow gained his abilities due to a transfusion from an actual mongoose. It's absolutely whack, and he became incredibly famous for that origin. Not good famous though, like he became a joke, which is probably a big reason that Roy Thomas later explained away that origin, mostly. Thomas's new take on the Whizzer's origin is that the Whizzer was already a mutant with super speed, but it was just that the mongoose blood transfusion, or maybe just the complete and utter shock of getting a transfusion from a mongoose, kickstarted the Whizzer's mutant powers, activating his mutant gene. And that does actually kind of make sense, sort of, I guess, only because the Whizzer's son was also a mutant. I'm not saying the mongoose part of this equation makes any sense though, don't worry. It doesn't. Number 6. Cloak and Dagger. Tyrone Johnson and Tandy Bowen were living on the streets when they were captured and experimented on by one Dr. Simon Marshall. Now, using his new experimental substances, Dr. Marshall had injected Tyrone, Tandy, and a ton of other captured individuals. The rest of the test group did not survive their interaction with the substance, but Tyrone and Tandy's latent mutant genes were activated to create Cloak and Dagger. There was one other who survived, who went by the stolen name of Martin Lee and became the villain Mr. Negative, but that's a story for a different time. For our two mutants, Tyrone, aka Cloak, developed a connection to the Dark Force dimension that existed within his cloak and allowed him to teleport, which was tempered by Tandy, aka Dagger's, light-based abilities that she could use as projectiles, which also gave her limited psionic and healing abilities. They are one of the more iconic duos in Marvel Comics, but not a lot of people realize that they are indeed mutants. Number 5. Namor. In 1920, Captain Leonard Mackenzie led a naval expedition to the Antarctic Circle that went pretty sideways and drew the attention of the underwater people known as the Atlanteans. This led to a meeting between Mackenzie and Atlantis' princess, Fen. The two fell in love and had a surface marriage. However, Leonard passed on in an attack from Fen's father, who did not know what had happened to his daughter. In the aftermath, a heartbroken Fen returned to Atlantis pregnant with baby Namor. This made Namor an Atlantean human hybrid, but he is much more than that, as he's also a mutant. This means Namor has a very unique physical makeup. He exhibits the long life and increased strength, stamina, and durability of an Atlantean, though all of those attributes are enhanced due to his human side as well. He possesses aquatic healing, radiation absorption, aquatic telepathy, electrolocation, atmokinesis, and hydrokinesis, but on top of everything else, he can also fly, with the aid of fins on his ankles that look very much like bird wings. And fun fact, he was actually one of the first heroes ever able to fly on his own in comic books. Number 4. Justice. This is probably one of the more unique mutant gene activations. So, picture this. Vance Astrovic, just your average teenager who was secretly being looked out for by the Guardians of the Galaxy of the future, who thought he was in danger because of this bad guy named Korvac. Now, when Vance met his future self, who was a Guardian by the name of Major Victory, who didn't get his mutant gene activated, it kind of freaked Vance out, understandably. incredibly, and that shock made his mutant power of psychokinesis burst into action. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for Vance. His dad was pretty terrible to him during his younger years, and when he got these powers, it only made things worse. His father was really against mutants and took it out on his own son. So Vance did what any sane person would do, and he ran away. He had some interesting adventures along the way, like hanging out with the Thing from the Fantastic Four. Now back then, he called himself Marvel Boy and even did some wrestling. Vance really wanted to be an Avenger though, but Captain America told him he needed more practice. Luckily, Night Thrasher and Nova were starting their own superhero team called the New Warriors, and Vance was all in. He quickly became one of their key members, meeting this awesome mutant named Firestar, and they kinda hit it off. Number 3, Vanguard. Nikolai Krylenko had a pretty intense childhood, to put it mildly. His dad, a Russian nuclear physicist, and the government realized that Nikolai and his twin sister had latent mutant abilities. Now for Nikolai, he possesses a mutant energy field that repels virtually all electromagnetic, kinetic, and gravitonic energy, which allows him to create force fields, fly, and redirect any energy repelled by his natural force field back at its source. So from a young age, they were molded into soldiers. They ended up joining the Soviet super soldiers backed by the KGB. Now Nikolai took on the name Vanguard while his sister became Darkstar. They didn't have the friendliest encounters with American heroes, even squaring off with they started off as propaganda villains. But things took a crazy turn when their father got turned into something called the Presence. The government sent Vanguard and Darkstar to take him down, not realizing they were targeting their own dad. Luckily though, they figured that out, and when they did, they were like, nope, not cool, and turned against the Soviet regime. So Vanguard, Darkstar, and another named Ursa Major became their own agents fighting for the good of the people, or trying their best to do so. Number 2, Santa Claus. In Marvel Holiday Special Volume 1, released on November 19th, 1991, with a cover date of December 1991, in a little story called A Miracle a Few Blocks Down from 34th Street, 'twas the day before Christmas, and all through the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters, Cerebro detected what it called the most powerful mutant ever registered, who had just miraculously appeared in New York's Rockefeller Center. The X-Men obviously went off to investigate, but this massively powerful mutant was also detected by a group of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, who also went to try and capture the mutant for their own evil purposes, resulting in a clash between the two factions. But this mutant just happened to be Santa Claus himself, who used his insane power to briefly transform the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants into toys. He teleported the X-Men away, erased everyone's memory, and then made it snow, giving New York the first white Christmas it's had in a hot minute. Number 1, Miss Marvel. What most people know about Kamala Khan is that she possesses a latent inhuman lineage, which was activated by the Terrigen bomb. Her exposure to the Terrigen mist turned Khan into a polymorph with the ability to stretch her body in almost any way, and for a while, it stayed that way. Now fast forward to 2023, and Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 26, with the return of the emissary seeking to sacrifice Mary Jane Watson. Miss Marvel protected MJ and fought off the villain, but while the other heroes involved were busy, Miss Marvel used her shapeshifting powers to impersonate Mary Jane and misdirect Emissary. However, he caught Kamala off guard by teleporting to flank her, and he took her life. Now Kamala revealed her identity to Spider-Man and passed away in his arms, but then, in the Krakoa Hellfire Gala from 2023, Kamala was surprisingly resurrected by the Five on Krakoa and was shocked when Charles Xavier, Emma Frost, and Cyclops revealed to her that she was also a mutant, making her an incredible
Mutant power should never really be underestimated, and I'm here to tell you about some folks to watch out for. Well, the very powerful X-Men member Pixie is a beloved queer and magical mutant for many Marvel fans such as myself, and today it is my personal goal to tell you why you should never really overlook her. Megan Gwynn, also known as Pixie, is one of the most interesting X-Men. She is half mutant but also half fairy. Her dual heritage gives her pixie-like eyes and colorful insect-type wings, and that gives her the ability to fly. She can also create this really cool substance that's pixie dust, and it can cause hallucinations. She also performs magic, particularly teleportation spells. Her magical aptitude also means she's really good in a fight. Her mystical talents essentially allow her to do anything, and when you combine that with this unique weapon that can cut magic itself and powers that act as a secret weapon against other mystics, I think I'm staring at a whole list of reasons why she shouldn't be doubted. I think her personality might secretly be her best tool. Her own experiences make her empathetic with the pain of others, but her bright and optimistic personality helps to draw people out of their personal darkness. Marrow, who is only otherwise otherwise known as Sarah, is a mutant who has spent a long time with the Morlocks. Her mutant power is primarily the ability to willingly grow her bones out of her body, turning them into armor, weapons, and even projectiles. This ability is accompanied by hyperdense bones, a healing factor, and even dual hearts. Also, being raised by Mikhail Rasputin kinda turned her into a violent and vicious warrior. She was literally trained to be an efficient killer, and she knows how to use her bone-based powers for maximum damage, efficiency, and cruelty. She could be a dangerous villain. Look, upon first review, some folks think her power's a little lame, because basically, yeah, okay, great, she can grow her skeleton super fast. Like, yeah, she can take a bone spur out of her leg, throw it at people, make some little knuckle guards, but like, when you really think about it, her power is so hardcore. That has got to hurt. And considering that at first she can't really control the growth of her bones until Weapon X gets involved, she probably had a really rough time growing up as a mutant. Sure, she's got a bit of a convoluted past, being raised by the Morlocks, but like eventually she joins the X-Men. But she's not really a team player, and she's not really great at playing well with others. But like, I love her fiery personality, I love her mutation, and once again, pink hair, totally a bonus. So Nocturne is this alternate reality character, and that's not gonna stop her from qualifying for today's list. Why? Well, because I like her. And she's blue. Also, she just happens to be the daughter of Nightcrawler and the Scarlet. So she has aspects of both of her parents' powers. Otherwise known as Talia Wagner, she has heightened agility, reflexes, night vision, suction, but those are the more like basic abilities compared to her other powers. She's got telepathy, psychic shields, even the power to possess people for up to 12 hours. Where her parents' powers are involved, well, that's her ability to create brimstone hex bolts, which are balls of energy that she pulls from the brimstone dimension. You know, the dimension where Nightcrawler teleports. There's a bit of a tangled storyline with Penance, but the basics are this. Penance is actually a hollow body with sisters trapped inside. She's made of redstone and is incredibly powerful. She can't really understand language, can barely speak, and she's the result of some crazy dimensional mutation, and has housed a rotation of 3 sisters, sometimes 1, sometimes 2, depending on when you're reading. And here's a wonderful example of why Penance is someone that we should definitely not underestimate. So when she first appears at the Academy, they put her into the infirmary, obviously. And when she tries to escape, she rips the entire place apart. So like, you go girl. Look, big supporter of women's rights and wrongs over here. So Cannonball can go really fast. Like, jet engine plane fast, with a force field. And yeah, well that's cool. Awesome powers are not the main qualifier towards being ranked today. He's a very well written and unique character, offering a lot of like fun stuff to the team. Hailing from a rural town in the south, he's a bit of a redneck, but he comes from a huge family where a lot of his siblings are also mutants. He's incredibly polite, salt of the earth, a giant science fiction fan. He has the sort of unique characteristics and easy charm that allow him to fit in with the team really well. And he just adds so much fun to any situation he's added to. Lifeguard's mutation is pretty interesting, and one that didn't really manifest itself until later in her life. Basically, she can adapt to survive in any situation, developing many different mutations and powers in quick succession in order to stay alive. So like, if you chuck her into water, she's gonna grow gills. Or if there's explosives flying at her teammates, she can generate a force field. Exactly the type of gal I want around in any life or death situation. Sure, this is a power that could get kind of convoluted pretty easily, and could induce boredom if displayed too much. But if handled correctly with the right storyline, come on, give me more of Lifeguard. So Iceman may only play second fiddle in the X-Men movies, but his ability to create unbreakable ice from water vapor present in the air is like crazy powerful. He can create virtually any kind of physical structure almost instantaneously. He can use ice to repair damage to his body, he can freeze the water molecules inside another living person, and he can convert himself into vapor. Writer Mike Carey has said, Iceman is in an elite class of Omega level mutants, given how he can literally influence the ecosystem of the entire world. Now while he's always had, yeah, a relatively large presence in the comics, thanks to his status as a founding member of the team, it almost seemed like we kind of forgot about him in the Ultimate Marvel universe. Sure, he's there, but he maintained this ambivalence that, while it made him the relatable character on the team, it just kind of felt like they made his stunning showings of raw power feel understated. Like, his potential needed to be tapped at some point, but then it felt like he was kind of forgotten. Much like his powers, Ultimate Iceman's potential as a character was consistently hinted at without ever being fully fleshed out. Havoc, otherwise known as Alexander Summers, is the younger brother of Cyclops, but I think he should be the one getting all the big time attention. He can absorb and store cosmic energy in his body, which he can then emit as a destructive plasma blast. However, he can't freely control the path of the attack unless wearing a containment suit designed for him specifically. With his power, Havoc is practically immune to heat and radiation, and can even attain flight by directing his energy emanation properly. Although considered to be at par or even more powerful than Cyclops, he's never had the kind of popularity that Buddy with the laser eyes has. Darwin is a character we've already seen get some big screen love. We saw him in X-Men First Class back in 2011 as part of the mutants that were recruited by a young Charles Xavier to go against the Hellfire Club. Darwin's power is instantaneous adaptation, which allows him to adapt to any kind of environment, any situation, any attack, which makes him one of the most durable mutants out there, with the capability of overcoming all kinds of hardships he comes across. But on screen, he was kind of a quick fatality. I don't know, but I think his power was meant to counter something like that. We all know and love Wolverine, the big guy with the crazy claws. He's kind of been like the big mascot for the X-Men franchise. But you gotta look at his son, Decken. Decken is Wolverine's son with his deceased Japanese wife, Itsu, who was killed with Decken still in her womb, who survived all of this because of his regenerative capabilities. He kinda grew up to hate and blame Wolverine for everything, and started as his antagonist before coming around. His powers are pretty similar to his dad. The crazy retractable claws, the regenerative powers, the senses. But one thing that sets him apart is his ability to control the pheromones of others, so he can manipulate the emotions and the thought processes of everybody.
I love my weirdos, but what makes a mutant weird? Why are some mutants welcomed onto the X-Men and others aren't? Some mutants are simply better suited to acting as a hero for all than others. I mean, if you know Axel Clooney, I think you know why I included him here on this list. Zeitgeist is most often associated with ecstatics. His power is that he can vomit up acid. Ew. He learned he was a mutant with powers in one of the worst possible ways during a makeout session as a teenager. Yeah. The girl he was with at the time survived, but he's never been able to remember her name, and as such, her presence haunts him. He's always wondered if remembering her name would help him to be less tormented by this moment from his past. Zeitgeist is not only weird, but I don't think he has the right attitude for the X-Men either. Sorry, Zeitgeist. Next up, Maggie is another mutant who is just straight up weird looking. In fact, when Alex Ross helped to create her along with Kurt Busiek, he helped to make her look even more strange than she was initially intended to be. Maggie was originally going to be a boy, a little green boy specifically, but Ross wanted her look to contrast even more with Angel, who appears on the cover of this issue with her, flying with his angel wings out while he carries Maggie in his arm. Maggie makes her first appearance in Marvel's issue number 2. She was born with her mutation and because of this was abandoned. She has such a sad story in comics, and while I don't think we'd ever see her on the X-Men, also because, you know, she's a little kid and they don't normally have little kids on the team. Teens maybe, but usually not like infants. I would love to see her appear more alongside them, just because she has such a unique look and sad origin, and I'd love to see her grow up and find happiness. She doesn't have to be on the X-Men team, but I don't know, just be cool to see her being mentored by the X-Men. This next one, Callisto, is too much of a rebel for the X-Men, but she also, for a while there, had tentacle arms, which is why I've included her here. She doesn't have them anymore, to be fair, but I thought that might be an interesting sight to see her recruited in the past, back when she did have her tentacle arms. Her tentacles, however, were not part of her mutation, but instead were given to her by the other mutant warlock, Mask, who can use his powers to change a person's form. Mask did this to torment Callisto, something he's done multiple times throughout her past, both by making her beautiful and by making her less than. And if you're wondering how do you torment someone by making them beautiful, it's because she's usually scarred, and he's like, no, you don't have a scar, and ha ha ha. Although really, I was thinking, I feel like Callisto's yeah, okay, good prank, I'm gonna go be beautiful, I guess. Alex doesn't have a fancy code name like Maggie either. He is one of the babies we saw in Inferno, the original Inferno, not the new one. His mutant power looks like it's similar to Glob Herman's. Honestly, I love Glob, although it sounds a little bit more useful than Glob's. But while Glob is a bizarre mutant who is well loved, Alex is tragically mostly unknown. I bet you didn't know about him before this list. Ergo, he is both weird and not someone I would imagine being on the X-Men. Alex has a goo body, which he can control, which basically makes him like a living, walking, gelatinous cube from Dungeons & Dragons. Except I don't think he disintegrates those he takes inside his form. Instead, he can only suffocate them, or he can simply engulf them to just move them somewhere else, immobilizing them for a time. This next one, Cell, is a weird one, which I guess fitting on this this list where we got a bunch of weirdos. He kind of reminds me of Maggot, honestly, but if Maggot didn't like have his maggots, his body can fuse the cells of his entire form so that they become one singular cell. This allows him to absorb damage without being hurt, basically reinforcing his form. He can also turn into a liquid-like state as well, and he can also emit ooze that is basically like acid, allowing him to burn those he comes into contact with, digesting them in essence from the outside. He was part of a group of Chicago mutant Morlocks and appeared in the miniseries by Jeff Johns and Sean Martinborough titled simply Morlocks. If you know me and what I usually like to talk about on this channel, then you know I'm a pretty big Peeper fan. Peeper is Peter Quinn. My first ever experience reading about him was during Messiah Complex, and from that moment on, I became a fan of his. This might seem odd to you if you read Messiah Complex. Now this might seem odd to you considering that in that story, he calls X-Factor to report that he's basically being followed, and he's soon after attacked and killed by Predator X. When Siren later arrives on the scene, it is implied that it is a very gruesome one. But I just tend to gravitate towards the mutants who feel very much like everyday characters. Also, if you're worried about Peeper, don't be worried because he later on just shows up and he's like totally fine. I don't think we've ever gotten an explanation for that, but somehow he's fine. I know it seems like he died horribly, but he apparently didn't. He just shows up later and it's never explained, in case you were wondering. So he's good. But I just tend to gravitate towards the mutants who feel like very everyday characters, I guess. They might not be the ones in the main books, but for some reason, that's what I like about them. Maybe it's because it makes them feel more grounded in reality or more relatable. After all, none of us on this planet are superheroes, and while some people might have abilities that make them seem that way, or might be heroes of a kind, superhero is not something that usually intersects. Characters like Peeper make me feel more seen in a comic. Like Peeper, I too had my own villain era, but am always striving now to be more of a hero in my own way every day. Peeper's powers aren't anything crazy. He has basically superhuman vision, which allows him to see further away, and which also allows him to see like closer up than normal human eyes can see. And while I feel some folks may have forgotten this one in recent years, he can also fire optic blasts, and mostly his eyes just kind of bulge out of his head. His optic blasts, though, I think are lesser strength and like lesser skill set than Cyclops. I feel bad for this next one. We're talking about Amber. She got one pretty cool story where she is clearly established as a college kid who just wants to live her life, and despite being immune, doesn't really let this define who she is or what she's capable of. And then right after, we think, wow, that's cool. Amber could be a really cool character to follow along, just even in a slice of life story, or especially if she was pulled into becoming a mutant hero. But no, she gets depowered during M-Day. Or at least that's what I believed happened. I'm not sure if it was ever specified. A lot of people were depowered during M-Day, and she's one of the people that we believe was depowered. I don't think she's ever specifically seen after her adventure with Jono during her appearance in his Chamber series. It was a mini series, only a few issues. Amber was definitely weird to behold because her default physical mutation made her green and covered in spikes. But she was actually a shapeshifter who typically shapeshifted into a beautiful woman in her dreams. But she also could control this ability and just shapeshift, I think, pretty normally. I think she just mainly preferred to like just appear as she was, which honestly, super cool. Kind of like Mystique, but what if Mystique wasn't a baddie and just like wanted to chill and go to college? Which I kind of love as a story. While a student at the Xavier Institute, I don't believe this next mutant, Slick, ever made the main X-Men team, nor has he been featured on any spin-off mutant team either. Slick's powers were charisma-based. He basically exuded charisma and made himself likable. He could also cast illusions, as we'd later learn when he and Quentin Quire's Kid Omega butted heads. The two didn't get along, and of course at one point, Quire used his powers to dispel the illusions that Slick was constantly casting. Now these illusions made him appear as a handsome young man, but this was not actually his true appearance, as it turned out. He also had a physical mutation and appeared as a small, web-footed creature with pointed ears. Kind of impish looking, if you want to imagine that, but I'm sure we're showing you a picture right now. After having his true appearance revealed at the moment when he was working on a song with his girlfriend Tattoo, she broke up with him. Maybe not because of his appearance, maybe more because she was like, you didn't even tell me this. I didn't even know this is what you look like. Slither isn't just a weird character, he's also a bad guy, which is why he would probably never join the X-Men. But if he was a hero, I'd be surprised to see him on the main team. For the most part, I'd say that mutants on the main X-Men roster tend to be pretty normal looking. In fact, many of them are also very pretty looking. I think for the most part, this is because the X-Men are meant to be a premier superhero team, serving not just the mutant community, but also the world at large. We don't usually see people with significant physical mutations on there. I mean, Beast is big and blue, but he's also often likened to like a giant teddy bear. And even with mainstay Beast, he started out looking just like a normal person pretty much, save for his oversized feet and hands before he went through his secondary mutation. Slither also literally looks like a snake, which I'm sure would make having to save people who are afraid of snakes, a pretty common fear amongst many people, a lot more challenging. And finally, Cool Million. 1. Cool Million is a villain. 2. He is the most 90s I've seen in terms of his character design. And 3. His name is Cool Million. So yeah, I don't think he'll ever be making the cut for the X-Men, ever. Cool Million operated as a mercenary in the comics and at one point was hired to work for Hydra. His mutant power was apparently psionic and that of persuasion, but he could only persuade people while like maintaining eye contact. Number 10, Destiny. Truly one of the most useless, I would say at least, in a fight. Destiny is still an extremely powerful mutant. While she might not be able to kick your butt physically, she could easily destroy most of her opponents simply with the knowledge she has of the future, and using it to hurt those who stand in her way and advance her own plots. Destiny is also one of those people who is a masterful and skilled manipulator of scenarios, often choosing to keep secrets in order to make sure her plans go to plan. When Mr. Sinister attempted to eliminate the Quiet Council, or, you know, most of them anyways, Destiny proved to be one of his greatest challenges in accomplishing this feat. As soon as Mr. Sinister focused on a direct plan of attack, it actually caused Destiny's powers to trigger, allowing her to sense the future of what he was planning, thereby preventing it from coming to pass by informing others on how to best avert that disaster. When you have a precog like Destiny, she can prove very challenging to get around, especially when she's someone like Mystique protecting and guarding her too, and especially if you happen to try to target her. I think the best course of action if you're going after Destiny is try not to target her. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and if you also love mutants as much as I do, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 9. Dr. Reyes. Dr. Cecilia Reyes is also a mutant, hence why she is one of the lead doctors on the mutant island nation of Krakoa. Although you might forget the fact that she's a mutant when it comes to the Good Doctor, because our focus is usually on her as a medical professional, as opposed to her as, you know, a mutant superhero. When it comes to being a mutant, her powers allow her to summon a bioshield of sorts, a very tight-knit biofield forms around her, and generally also instinctively appears at a whim whenever Cecilia becomes the target of an attack. However, this isn't the power that comes in most handy with Reyes, whose real usefulness does come from her skill as a gifted doctor and surgeon, who is also more familiar with mutant genetics than most doctors would be. Although at one point I do believe Jean Grey actually declared herself an impromptu surgeon as well, speaking of mutants that can be medical people. But Dr. Reyes, I'm pretty sure, is still one of the few mutants who actually has, you know, significant medical training and experience. Unlike Jean just walking in and being like, I'm a surgeon now. It's like, okay, Jean. You got enough going on. Number 8, Shark Girl. Shark Girl isn't particularly useless in my mind, but she also has some setbacks when it comes to her abilities, in the sense that she isn't always in control of them. And I think that we should acknowledge that, so that's why she's here. Shark Girl's mutant powers allow her to turn into a shark, and she doesn't suffer from being on land while in her shark form. She's kind of like, you know, a shark. She's like a shark, a humanoid shark, being able to breathe both on land and underwater, but she is susceptible to the temptation of blood. Ayara can go into a bloodlust, and as a result of this, she'll actually lose control over herself and basically enter into like a bloodthirsty rage. However, that being said, I still feel like she is underappreciated when it comes to what she is capable of. Not only can she seamlessly transition from shore to sea, being just as at home in the depths of the ocean as she is on the land, but Ayara as Shark Girl also gains super strength and super speed, so yeah. Number 7, Curse. Curse is actually one of my favorite New Mutants in the comics. I love Curse. Curse is a mutant whose power forces her to curse her enemies, and if she doesn't have any enemies on hand, forces her to curse those around her. She can't keep the curses in, otherwise they basically do damage to her, and while she can control the type of curses that she grants to others, or that she casts on others, performing nicer curses also seems to have a physical cost for her. So typically she has to make them kinda nasty in the interests of self-preservation. But also, Curse seems to generally enjoy making other people miserable and causing them harm to an extent, especially if it's people that she doesn't like or just simply doesn't care for. This is what makes her such an interesting and fascinating character to me, but makes her a dangerous character for most heroes to work with. The other thing I love about Curse is that she isn't really a hero, nor is she a villain. I wouldn't say she directly aligns with either side, although I could see her leaning I guess a little bit more towards villain if she wanted to. Currently Curse is lending her talents for better, and I guess for worse, to the X-Men Green Team, which is a small mutant team focused on fighting aggressively to save the environment, led by Nature Girl, who recently underwent a secondary mutation after deciding that she'd basically had enough and decided to let her anger motivate her activism. Number 6. Vanisher. Vanisher is an old school mutant villain who made his first appearance all the way back in the second ever issue of X-Men. Yeah, pretty old character. Well, his power set is actually pretty wild, allowing him to seemingly teleport almost anywhere instantly, with his limitations for bringing others and the distance not yet clearly defined. He also was pretty easily defeated by the X-Men, or more specifically their mentor Professor X, the first time around. While admittedly the young X-Men did struggle against the Vanisher during their first encounter, Professor X easily capacitated and defeated Vanisher by just wiping his memory. A pretty dark way to deal with a tough villain. But I do love how weirdly easy it was for Vanisher to be defeated. Vanisher has since made some appearances in the comics, but now in modern day his powers are even less impressive considering the caliber of teleporter heroes we're now familiar with. Vanisher doesn't really stand a chance against that, despite the fact that his power set is still pretty useful because, I mean, teleporting. Still, I feel like Vanisher versus Magic, I'm gonna put my money on Magic in that one. Number 5. Trinary. Trinary is another favorite of mine, and yet I can understand how some might not see her as the most useful or powerful mutant that we have, given her power set. She is able to communicate with technology and often get technology to work with her and do whatever it is that she needs. Seemingly, this actually isn't because Trinary can bend tech to her will, more that she's just able to communicate with tech and obviously knows exactly what to say to build an alliance, a connection to the technology, thereby encouraging the tech that she speaks with to actually help her with whatever she needs, of, their own volition. She might not be great in a fist fight, but if that fist fight happens to be against a computer, or if there might be a computer nearby who could be compelled to help Trinary in a fight, I mean, she's pretty useful in that regard, so yeah. And I imagine she'd be a star in a show like BattleBots, or she'd simply, just rally the bots and then free them from their human masters, create all kinds of chaos. I could see that being a thing too. Trinary's like, these tech do not want to fight for you, so they're free now. Number 4. Egg. Egg is the epitome of a mutant who is useless, but who actually winds up being also extremely useful. Egg is Fabio Medina. He used to be known by the mutant name of Goldballs, but ended up changing it after he realized that the balls that he was actually able to expel from his body as projectiles were actually infertile eggs. He ended up joining the Five on Krakoa, who are in charge of bringing back any mutants lost by following through with resurrection protocols. While not particularly useful in a fight, as proven by the fact that Egg has been killed multiple times over in the comics just recently, probably suffering the most deaths among the members of the Five, Egg is still a crucial member of this team. Without the eggs that he produces, resurrection would not be possible, hence why he is considered extremely useful. Just maybe not, super useful in a combat scenario. But if you need to be resurrected, Egg is definitely one of the 5 mutants that you should call. Number 3. Cypher. Cypher is of course a mutant who has often been put down as useless, but this was before his mutant glow up. In the last few years in the comics, we've seen a major upgrade to Cypher's power set. Initially, he was just, really good at communicating in the sense of being able to understand all languages, which, is useful, but definitely not anything special when it comes to some of the grand foes that the X-Men are pitted against. I mean, if you can just understand different languages, that's like basically having a translator on hand, so yeah. Over the years though, the meaning of his powers and the interpretation of them has changed and evolved. Eventually, Cypher also learned how to communicate with technology, and even learned how to communicate non-verbally, with fighting also being interpreted as a language that he could master. Although he hasn't recently been as present in the comics prior to Jonathan Hickman leaving his position as head of X, Cypher was probably one of the most important and influential mutants in the comics before that happened, and I would say he still kinda is. Without being in the spotlight as much, Cypher is still super important in terms of the lore and the world building that relates to Krakoa, as he is the only one that can easily communicate with and fully comprehend the sentient mutant island of Krakoa. Just can't really have Krakoa without Cypher. Forge. Forge is kinda a squishy guy, which is why he makes our cut, and not particularly well known for his skills, in a fist fight. But he is well known for making cool stuff, especially cool weapons, and because of that, he is actually extremely useful. Many also forget that Forge has experience with shamanism, and not only has a mutant origin, but an origin that is also attached to the world of magic and mysticism, which honestly is pretty cool. However, for those who want to argue that Forge could march in there alongside Cyclops, I think that I would say Forge actually prefers to outfit other heroes than do that himself. Although he could do so, I guess, if he wanted, Forge is generally best on the sidelines, and I think he knows this, helping his fellow teammates and allies to strategize their way to victory, and helping to outfit his fellow mutants to make sure they survive the battle and are left standing afterwards, no matter how tough, or likewise, how squishy they might be normally. Number 1. Dazzler. I mean, of course, we're doing a useless list, and even useless but useful, so obviously Dazzler's gonna take my number 1 spot, because she's my number 1 gal. Dazzler is taking our number 1 spot, not because of how useless she seems, but because of how truly useful her powers are, despite the fact that everyone else wants to call her useless. The only thing that really makes her seemingly useless is the fact that Alison Blair actually really prefers to use her powers for her performances, as opposed to being, the team leader of the X-Men, which honestly she easily could be. She's been an X-leader of sorts before, but not for the main X-Men team. At least, not as far as I know. Dazzler has powers that have been described before to be potentially unlimited in terms of just how much damage she could do. She can transmute sound into light, and while her light shows in her concerts might seem kinda tame if you're like, yeah, but how you gonna fight with that? She's also used her power set to defeat and defend against heavy hitters like Enchantress and the Hulk. And there's a lot of cool things she can do with that light, okay? Which I would also say means that she is honestly way more useful than people usually give her credit for. Still though, Dazzler prefers to be on the sidelines when it comes to heroics, and leave that to the professional 9-to-5 superheroes. But just remember that in a pinch, she could step in and prove herself to be even more powerful than some of the most famous mutant heroes around.
There are so many mutants out there, it's hard to remember them all, but is that what Marvel wants? I scream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream. That's a fun phrase, so why not make a character out of it? Does it sound like a weird idea? Yeah, that's probably why Marvel wants us to leave Ice Cream behind. Ice Cream's mutant ability is turning himself into any ice cream, even a banana split. If you leave him in extreme heat or cold too long, he's gonna either stay melted, unable to solidify again, or will freeze totally solid and can't move. He was in Obnoxo the Clown in 1983 and literally was not seen until 2023. In X-Men Before the Fall, Mutant First Strike, he is giving out ice cream at a celebration. He just gives out ice cream, he doesn't do anything else. It seems like he's a character Marvel brings in for fun, but not for us to remember long term. Evan Daniels, better known as Spike, was created for the animated show X-Men Evolution, and that's pretty much the only place he is. There was a version of him brought into the comics, but that guy was loosely based on Evan. There were backstory similarities, but that was pretty much it. Spike's powers have to do with his bones. He can create bone spikes anywhere on his body and then throw them at things. He later created bone armor that was self-repairing and could use his spikes to climb walls and stuff. His weakness is loss of calcium. Regrowing your bones all the time and throwing them around means his calcium levels are low, so he drinks a lot of milk. Poster child forgot milk campaign. I know that his weakness is that he has to replenish with milk, but I think that can also serve as mental warfare. If I was in the middle of a fight with someone and instead of water they stopped and took a swig of milk, I'm off my game. That would haunt me forever. Every time he throws his bones, we don't see a wound, so he probably has some sort of healing factor. The character has good bones, figuratively and literally, so why isn't he appearing in the mainstream comic universe? Well, his power set is quite similar to the pre-existing character Marrow, so that unfortunately might have something to do with it. The last time he was seen was 2003 in the finale of the show. Robin Vega appeared in Spider-Man 82 and 83 in 1997, and that's all. Literally nothing since then. She is a mutant, but maybe since she wasn't in the actual X-Men comics, Marvel has pushed her away. Her mutant ability is metal mimicry. She can make herself metal. It's living metal, so she can move and stretch her body parts around and even make her limbs weapons. She can melt herself down into a liquid or stay solid, it's up to her. And because she's metal, she's bulletproof. The powers are super cool, which is why Marvel has used very similar ideas with other characters. They're not exactly the same but different. Other metal mutants include Colossus, Mercury, and Flex. So the market is pretty saturated. The Spider-Man 83 comic ended with her literally just running off. Well, there are a few people out there who still remember her. It looks like Marvel might be sweeping her under the rug. She hasn't even been featured in more recent comics as one of those cameos of forgotten characters. Combo Man has shown up twice. Once semi-seriously, and the other was poking fun at the character. Combo Man was created because of a promotional agreement, which means he's really weird. The agreement was between Marvel, of course, and Eagle Snacks. He is a combo of a bunch of different Marvel heroes, and that means he has all their powers too. Combo Man is the hero. The human inside of him is Rick Wilder. Rick was a kid and he turns into Combo Man when he was near a lab explosion. Rick happened at the time to be carrying a Marvel comic book and Eagle's company snack brand Combo Snacks. Of course, these two things combined with Rick, and he is now Combo Man. If you want to check it out, Combo Man has one issue, it's just called Combo Man. His only other appearance was in Ziggy Pig Silly Seal comic at a Comic-Con in a back alley alongside a bunch of other weird forgotten Marvel characters. I count Combo Man as a mutant because quite a few mutants were part of the lineup that created him, like Cyclops and Magneto. Changeling is known for a few things, but you might maybe remember him either pretending to be Professor X or Elvis. Yeah, the Changeling's mutant ability is shapeshifting, but specifically the metamorph strain, as he is limited to humans. He had basic telepathy, but that was then boosted by Professor X. He used to just be able to influence people. Now he can read minds and make you think his thoughts. Professor X boosted him, and he pretended to be Professor X because the real Professor X needed to go prepare to fight an alien invasion. But Professor X couldn't just disappear, so enter Changeling. He did die as Professor X and was buried as Professor X. It was when he was brought back as a zombie that we got the Elvis moment. Zombie Changeling was helping out She-Hulk by providing a distraction, and that distraction was Elvis. He then went 6 feet under again shortly after. Changeling was revamped with a new name in some other universes. He became Morph, and he got a lot more character development and, sorry, but more interesting plot lines that he got to be himself in. It seems Marvel wants the Changeling version to be left behind and Morph to get picked up instead. Coming in all the way from Hollywood is El Guapo. He was a mutant stuntman. He worked on X-Statix, the movie, which is also the name of the real-life comic series. El Guapo appeared in X-Statix 9 and then perished in issue 18. Here for a good time, not a long time. Marvel might want us to forget this mutant because the guy didn't, really have powers. Instead, he had a symbiotic relationship with, take a guess, not a symbiote. Good guess though, he's attached to a skateboard. A flying skateboard. It moves at his mental command, and sometimes it even fights him. When El Guapo cheated on his girlfriend, the board beat him up, and was later his cause of death. He was impaled on his skateboard. It's all a little ridiculous, so it's not much of a surprise that Marvel has left El Guapo alone after his death. I feel bad for calling the mutant Ugly John, so I'm going to refer to him by the name he introduced himself as, Steve. Steve is a mutant with 3 faces, that's all. No powers, just serving face. Since he doesn't really do anything, it's understandable that he hasn't been revived since his tragic death in New X-Men 115. His first appearance was New X-Men 114. He wasn't around for a good time or a long time, poor Steve. The last early mutant standing without the help of Resurrection is Gabriel Shepard. His character is pretty interesting. He's a proto-mutant, an early version of mutants whose X gene was less evolved. There weren't many of these guys to start out with, and Gabriel was the last one standing as he looked the most human and was the most powerful. The other proto-mutants had been getting revived to be used as weapons, and Gabriel found out by reading the mind of an X-Men, and he was not happy. Like, he dispersed himself into pure energy, unhappy. This guy is super powerful. He was thought to maybe even be an Omega level mutant. He is immortal, he has super strength and hearing, has telepathic abilities, and can stop you from using telepathic abilities on him. He can fly, he can manipulate matter to make it something else, healing powers, he, like a power plant, he can generate electricity and even stop time. Like, that is so many things. Why isn't he a bigger deal? I raise you. Does Marvel want us to forget him, or is the omnipotent Omega level mutant using his power to make us forget him? When you look at it, the poor guy just seems to want to live his life out of the spotlight. He's been around for hundreds of years. He had to have known about the X-Men, yet he chose to stay hidden. He doesn't really want to use his powers. Maybe we should forget about him, just to let the poor guy rest. I did a video on the history of Magneto recently, and in that we briefly touched on the Magneto clone Joseph. He really had us all convinced he was the real Magneto for a minute there. In his defense, he was a clone of Magneto and he had amnesia, so he did his best. Joseph just is Magneto. Everything Magneto can do, he can do too. He also does his best at causing problems. He's died a few times, but then again, so have most Marvel characters. The first time he was resurrected, he framed Magneto for eliminating a bunch of people. He tried to bring Magneto back to his reign of terror. He's resurrected again after dying again. He keeps impersonating Magneto. It seems that Marvel only remembers and wants us to remember Joseph when they want to bring Magneto back without bringing Magneto back. Remember, Magneto died, actually this time, but then Magneto was spotted. Oops, sorry, that was Joseph again. Joseph was also already dead, but it's easier to just bring him back apparently. Irina Clayton hasn't been seen since her single panel appearance in Legion of X9. She was only there for a second though. Don't get me wrong, she slayed, speaking literally and figuratively. She got a total redesign, so if they hadn't explicitly said it was her, honestly, I wouldn't have been sure. She's a lot scarier now, but that's just because of a monster spell, so hopefully it's not permanent. Her mutant ability is extra mouths on her neck. The extra mouths let her project her voice so it sounds like she is everywhere. I want to know if she can sing in 4-part harmony, because if so, she should have gone into show business. Maybe that's what she was doing, because honestly, Irina doesn't do that much. Like, for the most part, she's just a student at the school that appears in the background. She did help confuse some people who were trying to break into the school, but her appearance in Legion of X is the first time she actually gets her hands dirty, that we get to see at least. This panel also confirms that she does sing. Wouldn't it be wild if she was gone because she was a backup singer for Dazzler's World Tour or something? Anyway, Marvel really must want Choir gone because they made a new one. Seriously, the mutant known as Scream changed her name to Choir, quite recently too. I guess Irina is really being put on vocal rest.